My name's Joe. I'm a crystal meth addict.
Hey, Joe.
How's everybody tonight?
Awesome.
Good. Is everyone else warm? Is it warm in here already? Yeah. All right. Who's here at position of neutrality for the first time tonight? Anybody? Good. A bunch of you. Well, first of all, welcome. And second, let me warn you in advance, you're liable to experience us just a little different than other meetings of the fellowship you may have attended. The reason that's liable to happen is we intend for you to have a different experience here. What we do here, we've been doing for a lot of years now, we simply take a look at the suggested instructions for a step or so a week directly out of this book. And though you might not be able to tell, this is the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism, also known as the Big Book. And we use this book in Crystal Meth Anonymous. Why? The process described by the authors of this book has been proven to work by addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances. So what we do here isn't really a teaching, but it's more of a sharing, but I don't think people would recognize it if we use those words. So really what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I find my experience in this book, and I'm going to encourage you to have your experience with the book, and if we both do our job, we'll share a spiritual experience in this room tonight. How many of you would like to do that?
Yeah.
How many of you have been here before and that's what you came here to do again? Yeah. So if you haven't been told and you're new to 12-step recovery or new to the program versus the fellowship, when we talk of a spiritual experience in 12-step recovery, we're talking about a sensory experience. You'll feel it. And when you do, I'll know and I'll call it to your attention, because we teach you to talk to you about the power we call God without giving you a demonstration of the power. Similarly, the doctor's opinion, he talks about we can recall that sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks or a few hits. Can you do that sitting here sober? Is everyone sober here now? For the most part? Okay. So can you bring to consciousness that sense of ease and comfort? Do you dare? Some of you won't. But breathe it in. Give yourself permission just to feel that. Now, if you can do that here sober, many days, many years, what's the likelihood that you can remain abstinent if we don't tap you into something every bit as tangible? It's not very good, right? So the program of recovery and the witness these people give us is that regardless of their belief, they found that this sense of power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them and continued to flow, and they could improve consciousness of it through a process of offering their life in service to others. Does that make sense? Yep. So tonight we're going to take a look at that third step decision, and we just had a discussion. Patrick and I just talked about it tonight, and Jeff last week we talked a little bit about this whole 1, 2, 3 thing. The fact of the matter is that all of us that have been in this manner of living any length of time will tell any of you that haven't been shown, if you don't get the first 3 steps, you're probably not going to get the rest. And it's not your fault if you don't, because you probably weren't properly introduced. Because a lot of times we talk to people about concepts and externals and all kinds of things that have no potential to awaken me to this being within. Right? So that's what this is all about. So we're in step 3 tonight, and interestingly enough, any of you ever been to an AA meeting?
Yeah.
You never know in here. We get every fellowship in the world in here. We love it. That's why we do this, actually. If you didn't know why we use CMA fellowship, because they don't have a singleness of purpose, and we don't want to offend anybody. So everybody's welcome here, regardless of how you identify. We're going to identify you as a child of God until you know. That'll be all right with you?
Yeah.
Okay. So in every AA meeting that you've ever been in, they probably have read a little portion of chapter 5 entitled How It Works. And interestingly enough, that's where they show us the wrap-up of steps 1 and 2, the all-inclusiveness of the steps thus far, leading us to a third step decision. So we're going to see if we can move through that experience, if that's all right tonight. All right, so they start with a promise and a condition. In the very beginning of the chapter, they say how it works. Are they talking about the power? Nope, because none of us can fully define or comprehend that power. They're talking about the process. So we might want to pay attention, because this is the program of recovery they're talking about. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay, so there's the promise and condition. See if you catch it. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. What's the promise?
Rarely people fail.
Rarely have we seen a person fail, and what's the condition? Who has thoroughly followed our path. Now, we would have to know what that path is, right?
Yep.
And who did they say we is?
First one.
The The first 100 who recovered. So if you've come into the rooms and you've been in the fellowship and your experience doesn't align with this, it doesn't nullify theirs. Because they've already told you, thoroughly followed our path. And they've told you who we is. Sometimes we misinform and say we're we. Not necessarily. Not if we haven't followed their path. We don't enter the world of the Spirit in the same way. Does it make sense?
Yes.
We're not unlikely to have a similar experience if we haven't done some similar things. Okay? It's not a condemnation of you or them. It's just the way it is. That's why they've told us. Why, if we want to pay attention, we may learn something, right? Okay, so those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. So that's their observation. Have you ever considered whether you might be a cannot or a will not if you've had some trouble in here? Any of you come here and have some difficulty sticking? I'll raise my hand. I know a few of you bounced a time or two too. Okay, so have you ever wondered whether you were a cannot or a will not? How many of you thought you were a will not until you found out you were a cannot? So we're going to quit trying to form those kinds of judgment about ourselves and others here. This is an end to condemnation. What difference does it make whether I cannot or will not if the result's the same?
Yep.
Right? It's like separating fly shit from pepper. No one wants to eat from either pile. Right? Okay. So those who don't recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. So it would be important for us to know what we're being dishonest with ourselves about, wouldn't it? And a lot of people think it's just everything. No, it's really very specific. So let's go back to the doctor's opinion first, and let's see what he says about an alcoholic with untreated alcoholism. On page XXVIII, Roman numeral 28. Are you there? Mm-hmm. Bottom of that page, it says, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol.
Yes.
Any of you like the effect? Didn't we just talk about bringing that effect to consciousness a minute ago? Okay? So the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Can you relate to that?
Yep.
How many of you have tried to sit here abstinent and thought, this ain't going to work for me? So they don't just give us that little bit of information and then not introduce us to something. How would that help? So if I don't find a way to get a sense of ease and comfort without going out in the world to get it, I'm going to be in trouble as an addict of the hopeless variety. Is that true for any of you?
Yep.
Okay, so then the good news was, we talked about it last week, that on page 50 of our book, these men and women who they've now told us by this stage who they are, they're the first 100 who've recovered, half of them atheists or agnostics, declared. The other half believers who think themselves condemned for some reason. Any of you relate to any of those? Okay, so it didn't seem to matter. Now we're going to talk about the collective group and what they're going to witness to. So here are thousands of men and women. We're at the bottom of page 50. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power, and to do certain simple things, there's been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. What do you imagine those certain simple things are?
12 steps.
Yeah, I've had a second step experience, and I'm about to consider a decision into a third step experience and embark on the rest of the process. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And so then it goes on to say that in the face of collapse and despair, any of you relate to being in the face of collapse and despair?
Yeah. Yep.
How many of you have found yourself in the face of collapse and despair in sobriety? This is why we want to dig in deeper rather than go back out in the world, right? What this will reveal to us is a sense of ease and comfort in the world without going out in the world to get it. Isn't that a handy little trick for us addicts of the hopeless variety to know? Okay, so in the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. Does that sound conceptual to you?
No.
No, it doesn't, does it?
Nope.
Power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowing into you. Notice they didn't say drip or trickle. The idea is that tangible power will present itself as a sense of power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowing into you. How many of you got such a flow when you lit up that pipe or slammed that dope or took that drink? A little power, peace, happiness, sense of direction. The direction was always right back to where you got it, though, right? No one said it was a good sense of direction. But what we got to do, we need something similar, something tangible. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so then it goes on to tell us that they're naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. So they're going to introduce us to a manner of living, and now that we know what it is we're going to be honest about, what's going on within us. Does that make sense? Nothing further than here. Okay? Their chances are less than average. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders. But many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. How many of you have been around long enough you've seen those people with grave emotional and mental disorders? How many of you have stayed long enough to realize it's you? And if you don't believe it, how many of you made it to Community Bridges or some such detox on the way? When you got there, did you notice there was a lot of people there you didn't want to be like?
Yep.
Did they remind you were there as a patient and not an observer? We don't believe we're insane. This is the interesting thing about addiction as a... Okay. We don't think we belong. I don't want to be like those people. Okay. Okay. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, what we are like now. Please get that right, guys. The reason I'm going to do the steps is to arm me with what I used to be like, what happened, what I'm like now, so I'm an effective witness to the power. It's never been about what it was like, what I was, you know what I mean? It's never been circumstantial. It's always been talking about what my emotional and mental states were. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so, and what we're like now, if you decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. Well, in order to make a decision that we're willing to go even to certain lengths, it'd probably be a good idea to see what they had, right? Because it isn't the rooms, it's what they witnessed they had, right? So let's go, where is that, Sean, 25?
Yep.
Go to page 25. And let's see if we want any of it, if we're willing to go to any lengths to get it. Middle of that page. The great fact is just this, and nothing less, that we've had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. How many of you need such a revolution? Any of you feel overwhelmed by the world at times?
Yep.
Okay. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. Prior to such an experience, if you've had one, or just getting you here, what have you ever been absolutely certain about? If I can get over to that dope house, I'll feel different.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I was absolutely certain about. It didn't matter what I faced circumstantially.
Right.
So if I don't get that kind of certainty, I'm going to have a tough go, aren't I?
Yeah.
Some of you felt that. That was a first step experience. Okay. So he has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. So do you want that?
Yep.
Some of you are still feeling that certainty. That's cool. That's cool. That's the power we call God around here. That's what we want you to know. Okay? All right, so then we're ready to take a look at the steps, right? If we want that. At some of these we balked. Okay, I want that, but I'm not telling that.
Yep.
Any of you? Or are you looking at the amend step? No, fuck that. If I'd have known I had to give it all back, I'd have never stole that much, right? Doesn't matter. As we move, we get empowered, right? Okay. So at some of these we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. When they say we could not, they all tried to find an easier, softer way. So when you do, don't beat yourself up. Get back on the path. That's part of the path, right? Matter of fact, you can't get off the path. Once you're on the path, you're on the path. Doesn't matter what you think or someone else tells you, you're still on it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so with all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Where's the main problem of the addict come from? Sinner. Sinner's in the mind. And where do our old ideas come from?
In the mind.
From the mind. So if we're going to hold on to our old ideas, it's not a rule, it's just a no-brainer. If I'm going to hold on to my old ideas, where the problem, main problem, sinners, I'm probably going to have difficulty in growing into this new experience.
Yep.
Just that simple. No one's trying to beat you up. It's just, if you're stopping in something you know that has the potential to benefit you and you see benefiting others, you might want to ask yourself what's stopping you.
Yep.
So remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it's too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is?
God.
That one is God, right? So when you guys are feeling something in here tonight, what are you feeling? You're feeling that power which is God. That's what we try and show you from here. When you hear something in here and you get a revelation in you, that's not the speaker, that's the power. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So may you find him now. Where are we going looking? They told us last week, deep down inside. And how are we going to find him? Sometimes we're going to have to search fearlessly. So now the decision is laid clearly before me, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay. Half measures availed us nothing. Why do you think they put that little tidbit right there?
They tried it.
How many of you said, yeah, say the prayer. And then, like stall.
Right.
We don't enact the decision until the power empowers us to do it. Jeff was talking to me last week about something that's been said sometimes in here before. Did any of you ever take the second hit of anything? Or did the drug take the second hit? So what's our likelihood of survival if we don't encounter a power that takes the second hit? Not good, is it? This power takes the second hit. You met him in 2. It'll empower the decision in 3. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so have measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We ask his protection and care with complete abandon. There's your second step here. We don't ask anywhere for protection and care with complete abandon without some tangible experience, do we?
Yep.
How many of you can remember going to the dope house and asking for that with complete abandon? It's power, man. I'm not trying to make light. I'm trying to say that's our nature is to be spiritually released. We need to find spiritual release so we're not comfortable. We're restless, irritable, discontented. Has that described you at times?
Yes.
Okay, that's what the program of recovery is about, not the fellowship, the program. Okay, so here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. I'm going to jump from there. You know what? Let's go over to Bill's experience real quick. He always does a good job talking to us about this experience. About, I don't know, page 11. Yeah, let's just take a look at 11 real quick, in the middle of that page. I don't know.
13.
You think so? Yeah. Yeah, let's go to page 13 and the top of the page. And let's look at the third step decision. We kind of covered the other 2 in the last 2 weeks. Okay, so at the hospital I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. There I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him to do with me as he would. So, 2 things. What is he doing at this third treatment he enters? When he says, there I humbly offered myself to God.
Third step.
Does that sound like a third step prayer?
Yep.
He qualifies that to God as he then understood him, and that's why I was sort of reluctant not to start a little bit further back. I want to go back to 11 just for a minute so you can get a sense of how Bill understood God prior to his earlier agnostic tendencies. Make sense? Okay, so I'm at the bottom of 11. It said, that floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in the human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped new soil. So he can see a guy who can't possibly be sober. Ebby is, for Bill, the one that was worse than him. Any of you ever take it out so far that, you know, you always manage to keep someone worse than you, but they got harder and harder to find? Okay. Okay, I want to jump to the bottom of that page. So then he talks about Ebby's introduction to him of choose any conception you want. And then at the bottom he says, thus I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At long last I saw, there's Ebby, I felt, because he had just had that revelation of the real significance of his experience in the cathedral. Those of you that weren't here last week, if you know the story of Bill, before he went to war, he went to the graveyard, he saw a soldier, the gravestone of a soldier who had survived war and then drank himself to death. And so then as he's talking to Ebby, he starts having revelations through him, and he's like, wow, the real significance of that time in the cathedral burst upon me. That power was with me then, and now I'm an old soldier who survived war, and I'm drinking myself to death. And he's with me now here in the kitchen, and there's the miracle. Does that make sense? Some of you are feeling that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then he says, at long last I saw, I felt, I believed. So God of his understanding was tangible power now. Not a concept, you understand? And if we don't help people with that, they miss the whole deal. So that's what he offers himself to, tangible power. Does it make sense? And Bill's told you all along what he believes about the religious teaching. He's not a fan. Right? Anyone else relate to Bill? Yes. Okay. So let's go over back to page 60. So we saw what Bill is. He did his prayer. We know what the prayer is to empower him to move. I'm not going to move through that step experience. We'll move through this one and we'll see how it goes. Okay? So after the steps on page 60, it says, many of us exclaimed, what an order, I can't go through with it. How many of you have had such a reaction? Okay, so that's a normal reaction, right? Destruction of self-centeredness is an attack on the ego, and it doesn't matter how enlightened we believe ourselves to be, that's always a life and death struggle with self-identity versus divine identity. Because in divine identity, I have no self-identity. And self-identity is important to me. Anyone else? But enough of me talking about me. Let's hear what you think about me. Anyone? Okay, so do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. So instead of yelling bullshit when people say I can't go through with it, which I hear in the room sometimes, a better approach would be do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. And if you don't believe that, how many of you thought someone else caused the way you thought or felt today?
Yep.
Then you failed. Because they can't, right? They simply reflect what I'm thinking and feeling. They can't cause. Yeah, exactly. So none of us are saints. The point is we're willing to grow. Why? Self-preservation first, and then preservation of others, right? As we shift, okay? All right, so no one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We're not saints. The point is we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. Can you see now why they would be?
Yep.
Okay? So the principles we've set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. Notice how they separated those two ideas.
Yep.
How many of you were confused when you first got here and thought that the reason you couldn't manage your own life is because you were having a little chemical issue? I suggest to you, you were trying to manage your own life with the chemicals, and then that got out of hand, right? Better living through chemistry until it just got nutty.
Right.
Anyone else?
Yep.
So they took us back to what the unmanageability really is, right? Okay, that was a step 2 experience. You remember it?
Yep.
Yeah? You want to look at it again? Okay, let's go back to 52. I could feel a little bit of somebody saying, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. So page 52, middle of the page, this is the unmanageability, and this is a lot of times we don't discover it till we sober up. Okay? So we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems this same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. How many of you got sober, discovered you had trouble with personal relationships? How many of you figured out it was people causing that and just isolated off by yourself? How many of you still had trouble with personal relationships all by yourself? So the main problem centers in the mind. The only problem with the world is I still got to wake up with me. Okay, so we couldn't control our emotional natures. Any of you had that experience?
Yes.
You know what they're talking about? You're sitting there all chill, and then some son of a bitch walks in, like, attitude of gratitude to bucket of fuck it, like now. Guys, we were never designed to control our emotional nature, which is why they want us to learn to discipline our thoughts. The emotion is an expression of a thought life run amok. If I catch it in the thought life stages and turn my thoughts to others, we arrest that cycle of spree and remorse. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so we couldn't control our emotional natures. We were prey to misery and depression. How many of you found that out after you sobered up? I'm so depressed. Well, of course you are. We're going to get you some purpose and get you moving. Right? Of course you are. Okay. We couldn't make a living, had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy, couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Anybody had all those experiences?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So that's the unmanageability, so that we're at least copping to something we know, right? Intellectually. See, we're supposed to move consciously into this decision. A lot of times we think we trick people into the decision, and that's false. We've got to lay it out for them consciously so they can move consciously in it. And if you're working with someone who can't make sense of it, one of two things is going on. You don't want to understand it, or they don't understand it well enough.
Right.
So, find someone who can help you understand. Does it make sense? Because the process, none of us comprehends the power, but the process is very, very simple. Okay? Okay, so that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. How many of you know that by personal experience? Because how do we relieve our alcoholism? By drinking. Right? And everyone says, don't drink, Joe. Yeah, but I can't relieve my alcoholism. Anyone know what I'm talking about? What do they do when they relieve your alcoholism at the detox? They give you Ativan or Valium. Chemically the same. We don't have any synthetic way to relieve alcoholism. That's what the doctor tells us early on. Does it make sense? Okay. And that God couldn't, would if he were sought, but only when we know God the experience, right? So we're going to move forward with a God that is the subject of my experience, not the object of my belief. And thankfully, not the object of anyone else's belief either. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. The main problem centers in the mind. We witness to our experience. Okay? Okay, so being convinced, we're at step 3. Being convinced to what?
ABC.
ABC. Do you see why we spent a little time there to make sure we understood what we were deciding? Okay? So, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood Him. Just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? So what do we mean? What do we do? I could make it easy for you. We're going to take the rest of the steps once we've asked His power to empower us to do so. Right? That's what the prayer is all about. The prayer is saying, okay, I've met you, take me. But I have to have met the power first. Does that make sense? Okay. So the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. So are you convinced?
Yes.
And based on what? Your experience. But read the sentence again. It says any life. That's a higher standard, isn't it? So I've got to quit thinking that world out there is causing the way I think and feel. Right? Any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. So I don't need to look any further than here. I could close my eyes and learn this experience, couldn't I?
Yep.
But when I open my eyes, I'm deceived because I think you're causing how I think and feel. And then I suffer because I suffer from my thoughts about what you said or did much longer than I do from what you said or did. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Supposed to make sense. Okay, so on that basis, we're almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Have you ever discovered that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Now, please know that these authors use the words they mean, and they mean the words they say. When they want to talk about alcoholics, they'll say alcoholics. When they want to talk about people, they'll say people. So it's important that you know that, because the third step isn't about relieving my alcoholism. The third step is about relieving my human condition. So I need to understand where I'm different from other people, because none of us likes to think they're bodily and mentally different from their fellows. They already told us that, and more about alcoholism. Although a lot of us like to think it when it suits us. But anyway.
Yep.
Okay, so each person is like the actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing.
Thank you.
There you go. Everyone gets to laugh at him, but do you get it? Do you get what he's calling your attention to? I'm trying to help, and I'm being modest and self-sacrificing. Okay, then on the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. Any of you ever experienced that? But as with most humans, he's more likely to have varied traits. How many of you have discovered that?
Yes.
Okay. What usually happens?
Show doesn't come off very well.
Any of you notice that? If every time you assume the worst of somebody because of the moment you met them in, do you not suffer from their difficulty rather than your own?
Yes.
Don't you linger in the thought of what you saw versus what you know? How many of you hate it when you make a mistake for the very same reason? Trying to learn to separate human behavior from humans. Because we're not going to learn to love humans until we learn to separate behavior from the being. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we got to learn to see what we see. Okay, so what usually happens, the show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think that life doesn't treat him right. Any of you get that place? Why me? You ever had that? Oh, you got to be kidding me, right? He decides to exert himself more. He becomes on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious as the case may be, and still the play does not suit him. Have you ever wondered why that is? You're out arranging it all perfect, and
Because I'm trying to manipulate people.
yeah, and sometimes not even consciously. Right. So what I figured out what they were talking about is this is a show of my life. Right? Not to eliminate anyone else. Everyone reads this book personally. But this is the show of my life. And I couldn't figure out why nothing was going right, but every time the light panned to me so I could play the role that was my life, I was out arranging the lights, the scenery, and the ballet. Show couldn't come off because I wouldn't play my part.
Yep.
Does that make sense? Some of you felt that. That was another first step experience. It's all right, we're not trying to crush anybody here. We're trying to, let's go on, man. This is about getting free of that illusion. Okay? All right, so where am I at? He becomes, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, he becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? So have you got to that point?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So what is his basic trouble? Is he not really a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Guys, I've seen people over the years turn this to first person. The reason they wrote it this way is so it's not as assaulting on our ego in early growth. And so we want to discover ourselves in it without someone telling me that's me. I want to tell me that's me. I don't want you to tell me that's me. So don't rewrite the book, man. Just experience the book, okay? Show people and bear witness. Does that make sense? Please. They wrote it the way they meant it. Okay, so am I not a self-seeker? When I was doing all these kind gestures humbly, how come I was offended by you not responding to my expectation? If I wasn't really a self-seeker even when trying to be kind. And that isn't condemnation. I didn't know that's what I was doing. I had no conscious participation. It's just my nature.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay? Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only he manages well? Have you ever been victimized by that delusion?
Oh, yeah.
Did you know it was a delusion?
No.
You know the nature of delusion. The nature of delusion is I lie to me and I don't know I'm lying.
Right.
So if you say, I know I'm delusional, you're lying. Right? It's just not the nature of delusion. Right?
That's right.
Okay. Did you know that the idea that you can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world is a delusion? That you can be happiness and satisfaction in the world, but you can't wrestle with externals to produce it because the externals are simply reflecting what's going on within you. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things he wants, and do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Have you ever been running around acting like you're in charge, and someone figured out you weren't in charge? In fact, they think they're in charge. And then you got this thing going on and no one's in charge. If you haven't, then, volunteer for a committee around recovery. See what happens. Yeah? Okay. Is he not even in his best moments a producer of confusion rather than harmony? Our actor is self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. He's like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, complaining of the sad state of the nation, the minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century, politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave, the outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him, and the alcoholic who has lost all and is locked up. Whatever our protestations, are not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, or our self-pity. So we're just bringing it home. Whatever it is that I'm disturbed about out there, is it not some unrest within me? And this is a book of experience. If you're not there, that's fine. That's what the process does, is reveal to us what the world's really showing us. Okay? So selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. So can you relate to being driven by fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity?
Oh, yeah.
Without giving meaning to those words, just being driven by thought and emotion. So that's why we want to get to a disciplined thought life, and we want to be empowered by this power that then employs our thought life, and we're no longer driven by these things. In fact, we use them as tools to win others, to help others see the light. Does it make sense? Okay. All right, so sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past we've made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. So if you're new to this, remember this is a book of past tense. We know that many of us came here from terrible abuse as children and maybe even into adulthood. We're not saying that abuse had anything to do with you. What we are saying is if you got the grace to get through it, you'll be a powerful witness to others going through it. And we're going to convert the experience, whatever the experience was, we're going to introduce you to power to convert the experience. Does that make sense? Okay. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. Do you understand how they arise out of myself? Because whatever's going on, I'll assign a meaning to it. And it may not be the meaning it has, and it may not be the meaning you intend, but I've assigned it and I suffer from it. Now I want to blame you. Yeah. Now my blindness is your fault. And now I truly am powerless.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So how many of you want some of you want your eyes opened? That's the point. That's the point. Okay, so they arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. So now they're talking about me, perhaps you. Most people, they're just regular examples of self-will run riot. Me, I'm an alcoholic. I'm an extreme example of self-will run riot, and I don't think so.
True.
What's the chances that I can live long or happily in this world?
No.
0, because I'm an addict of the hopeless variety. That make sense? So I have to do this even if no one else has to do it. So important we get this because we get into the fellowship and people will talk like everybody's in the program when they've never read the book. And if you've never read the book, you've never been in the program. Because the program's only discussed in the book. The fellowship's in the room. The program's in the book. Okay? So they arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. I must be rid of it. It's okay what you do. Does it make sense?
Yes.
We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. And there often seems entirely There seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we couldn't live up to them even though we would have liked to. How many of you had that experience in recovery? You got taught this new manner of living and you thought that was the solution. And then you started running around trying to live the steps and then found out you couldn't live up to them. And what you noticed first was other people weren't doing it right either. They were doing it wronger than me. But this isn't a book on how anyone else ought to behave. This is a book on how if I will try and behave, it won't matter to me how you behave.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Very much.
So neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. So by now they know God to be a tangible power. They tried wishing and trying on their own power. And when they sought power, this tangible power took them in another direction. Changed their mind. Even though half of them were atheists or agnostics. Is that a good story to tell?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so this is the how and the why of it. How and the why of what? What do we mean? What do we do? Right? So now they're going to answer us. Right? This is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. Why?
Because it didn't work.
Because it didn't work, and I know that, right, from my own experience. And I didn't even believe in God, and now I've been playing God. That's really disturbing. No wonder it didn't work. Because I thought God was a concept. Anyone else here know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
When I found out God was an experience, that changed the whole world.
Oh, yeah. Game changer.
Yep.
Next, we decided that hereinafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He's the principal, we're his agents, he's the father, and we're his children. Most good ideas are simple. And this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. This newfound power within, I'm going to let direct. As I take their suggestions, that direction will come clearer and clearer to me. Power, peace, happiness, and a sense of direction. I will learn to know the difference between divine thought through me and my own thoughts. And they'll often come at me at the same time.
Yes.
Have you ever had that happen?
Yeah.
So then you'll know the power is real. Take a certain attitude toward that power. Sometimes I disagree with the power and I'll act in my own interest and find that I should have listened to the power. And it's all in the thought life. Anyone know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
What you see going on up here, oftentimes when I can't find the page, I know the book and I know where the shit is. It's because I'm wrestling with the power about what to say, and the power knows who's here. It's true. That's what you're seeing. Okay? Okay, so here's a promise. When we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed.
Yep.
How many of you understand what they're saying? I felt some people feeling it.
Oh, yeah.
So when we really know what we're doing, I'm going to let this power take me and direct my life. And I'm going to go where this power takes me.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Did you find a lot of things following all of a sudden to reaffirm the decision? Did things just start changing and all of a sudden you knew when people talked about this power, you knew what they were talking about. In fact, when you heard them talking about it and you knew they knew, you knew because of the way it made you feel.
Right.
Some of you are still feeling it as we're going. That's the point. If we don't show people tangible power, we've cheated them. Okay, so we had a new employer. Being all-powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. So what would that look like? They wouldn't tell us that if they weren't about to give us a job, right? I got a new employer. What's step 12 suggest?
Go out and carry the message.
I'm going to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all my affairs. And being a light in the world, I'm probably going to get called by all kinds of opportunities to serve. Have any of you had that happen?
Yep.
Yes.
And we're going to start remembering then that I'm there to act as kindness, power, peace, and happiness, not like I sometimes feel like acting. How many of you have had that experience?
Sure.
Okay. So he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. How many of you discovered that how little your plans and designs really were? Some of us once had great plans and designs, and in the grand scheme of things, they mean nothing once we find out what purpose is in this thing, right? It's not even about just touching addicts. How many of you have learned that? This world desperately needs kindness and understanding, and you're vessels of that if you wish to be.
Yes.
As a result of trying to tear your life apart with chemicals. And we say that this, we don't get this loving power. That's crazy. Everything I did to destroy my life and the lives of others has been converted as a tool for healing. That's the greatest story to tell, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so more and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. So are you on that page now? Are you seeing what they're talking about? Not on my own doing, because this power came into me and changed my mind. I now have the power to tolerate the intolerable. I have the power to love the unlovely. I have the power to be kinder than I feel like being. And it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with gaining access to this power and taking a certain attitude toward that power. Right? Have any of you had that experience? Yep. See how it's tangible? See why we do this? Yep. Okay. So then it goes on to talk about new power. As we felt new power flow in. Again, they didn't say drip or trickle.
Right.
New power. What's new mean?
Never before.
Nothing like anything I've ever experienced before. And if it doesn't overtake that experience I had in the world, I go back out in the world to get more.
Yep.
Many of us have done that, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, how many of you, though, when you were a drinker, would be starving, hungry, but wouldn't drink because you didn't want to wreck the buzz? In time, if you tap into this power, you will find that even though it'll call to you, you're not going to want to eat of it because you don't want to wreck the buzz.
Yeah.
I don't know when that'll happen, but I assure you it will. Stay on the path. Okay? As we discovered, we could face life successfully as we become conscious of His presence. It's important you understand, when we talk about consciousness of presence, we're talking about an awareness of being aware. There is a presence on me and in me that is not of me. Right. And I'm aware. It's not conceptual. Does that make sense? Okay? We began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or hereafter. We were reborn. We're now at step 3. Remember when they said that 2 pages ago? We're like, yeah, any length. But we had a little more digging to do, right? To understand the entire conscious decision. Okay, so many of us said to our Maker as we understood Him, go ahead, join me with me. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Okay, notice there is no amen there. Why? Because that's the first half of the prayer. I just asked for power to get through an inventory so I can see what I was like, what happened, what I'm like now. And then I'm going to get a list from some of that of people I've harmed and how I've harmed them and who I'm willing to go out and help. And then I'm going to say a 7-step prayer, which will complete my 3rd-step prayer, and then there will be an amen. Right. Now that my eyes are open, I can move consciously into the new manner of living. Right. Does that make sense? How many of you speak in King James language?
I do.
Those of you who don't speak in King James language, you can go ahead and it says the wording was, of course, quite optional so long as we express the idea. So we shared with you the idea of talk to God how you talk to God. Talk to God how you talk to a friend, right? And I'm running over, so thanks much. We'll see you next week.